Welcome back to the MoChill Zone, and now more with Alan Young.
But if you want to talk about, so I could talk about interviewing style, and then I'm also happy to talk about, I guess, radio voice. But I know very little. My voice on the radio is actually my biggest insecurity, and I've taken one lesson from a local actress, but still a work in progress. But really, the thrust of what I've learned for voice is just use your normal voice. Don't try to modulate your voice at all. And so before the show, I do this thing where I hum and I go, and like the hum that sounds the best. I hear that and I say, I'm speaking from my diaphragm. And I just start speaking from my diaphragm, feel it low in the stomach, and then I start doing tongue twisters. Show.
Unique New York.
I slit the sheet I slit, and on the slitted sheet I sit.
She stood on the balcony, inexplicably mimicking him hiccuping whilst amicably welcoming him in.
That was pretty impressive.
That's my theater degree right there, y'all.
That's awesome. So I do vocal warm-ups, and then I read the script, and I underline the words of emphasis that I want. But that's as far as I've evolved on that side. On the interview side, I've been honing the interview for... I bought The Art of the Interview by Lawrence Grobel sophomore year of college, which was 20 years ago.
I have to look into that one.
Yeah, The Art of the Interview by Lawrence Grobel. He used to do the Playboy interview. And the Playboy interview was like the flagship product of Playboy outside of the nudie girls, right? And those jokes like, oh, I buy Playboy for the articles. Like, you probably know Playboy had amazing articles.
For sure.
Yeah, he did.
Especially like back in the day. Like, Hefner was really came up as a writer.
Oh, yeah. What was Sean Connery's one? Is that Playboy?
I don't know if I'm familiar.
What do you talk about?
Maybe.
It started off on Playboy, and then what's her name? Barbara Walters brought it up again.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So yeah, it was pretty. And then John Mayer had the racist thing that he said. Yeah, there's lots of sticky stuff.
Right.
Came out of Playboy.
Okay.
Very controversial.
So Lawrence Grobel did the interviews, and I remember reading that book, and I've continued to read books on how to interview. So if you guys want, I could share a couple things.
Yeah.
Oh, please do.
For sure.
So I started with asking tough questions politely. And I like to think of an interview as imagine like a line graph, and you have that little needle, and you want that needle to keep growing up the X and Y to more interesting content, right?
Linear.
Linear if you will. Yeah, an exponential
linear.
And
sorry, those were nerds.
Yeah, I know. They said I didn't have to.
And so the way you get exponentially linear is you start with one thing that Grobel said in his book is you just have to get comfortable asking questions that most people are not comfortable asking. Like we talked about losing our moms.
Right.
Most people, when that comes up, like I noticed, you're like, oh, we'll talk about that later. Like that's human nature, right? And the art of the interview is to actually break through that and say what happened.
Right.
Like it's the whole, like Kurt Vonnegut said, if I see someone with a bum leg in the grocery store, I ask him what happened to his leg. Right?
Yeah. I think that's great, man.
Kurt, I can see him doing that, man. Just like no subtlety.
No filter. And so that was, I had a problem with that when I was in my younger years, is I made everything an interview, and I used to piss people off, like at parties. Because I just keep hitting them with questions.
Rubbing them the wrong way.
And people feel at some point antagonized if you just keep asking questions. And that's why I always, when I can, when it's appropriate and when it benefits the interview, sprinkle in something about myself, even if it's just a single sentence. to remind someone that they're speaking to a human and they're not being interrogated.
Well, but also to cut in on that too. Also, it also helps them to be able to connect with you, so they'll be able to open up and share. Because people don't want to give if you're not willing to give. It's almost like that analogy: you got to give to get.
Right.
And so,
I had lunch with Pamela Wu, who's another fill-in host of Insight, a couple days ago. She said, "Well, Insight's about peace. People want to feel at peace when they're listening, and most people do. You know, if you like think about the podcast that you like, some people are into those hard charging ones where people are shouting at each other, but most people like ones where it's two people having a relaxed conversation, whether they're talking about something funny or something difficult, relaxed. And so after you ask that question, it's like a deeper question, let them tell that story, and then you look for opportunities to continue to elongate that theme. You know, it's like, oh, I put out this album when I was having a really tough time in my life. And he started using all this production techniques to refine the sound. And in my mind, I go, okay, I'm going to talk to him about production techniques if this conversation gets stale. But let's follow the thread of I was having a tough time in my life.
right.
And it's like, so what was going on? And the person's like, might be like, oh, well, I was drinking too much, and I was fighting with my girlfriend, and it was just I was having nightmares, I wasn't sleeping. And you have to have the guts to be like, what were you fighting with your girlfriend? And if the subject is willing to open, they might say something like, well, she wanted to start a family, and I wanted to. And then you might say, think about the album, because people want to hear about this album that they're promoting. Say, do any songs relate to that? And maybe they do. Or maybe it's like, no, not really, but there was this other thing I was dealing with, and I wrote the song about that. Or like the fight with the girlfriend, I actually turned it into a song about a bird or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like the energy was used,
energy
but not
was
necessarily the topic.
Yeah, right. And so the idea being, great interviews, it's like therapy. And a good therapist will like see what you're giving them, little signposts of where you can go, and then they're searching for that one that's going to open you up the most. And so to unspooling that narrative until the person has less to share, or the conversation naturally drifts. And then you might bring in, oh, but you also had this production, and you were using interesting production. So you sort of make a mental note of that.
Circle back.
And then you circle back, right? And so I'm mostly on script at Insight, but that's because I'm new, it's a limited term, and I don't have that confidence yet. But like Jeffrey Callison, the original Insight host, he would go in just with a few bullet points, just ready to have that conversation, which takes guts when you're on live radio.
Right, of course, definitely.
But
now,
that's
do you write them down?
I write my questions down.
Okay, I'm talking about when you think about those, you circle back. Do you how do you remember? Because sometimes you'll get the conversation, you'll forget, and it goes on. How do you keep that key factor to come back and circle back? What's your technique for that?
I don't smoke pot before the interview.
Okay.
Because then I would never remember. But what I'd say is, I got this from Neil Strauss. Neil Strauss, he was the ghostwriter of the Dirt Motley Crue. He was the ghostwriter of Marilyn Manson had a memoir back in the day, The Long Road Out of Hell, something like that.
Back into it.
He did one for Janet Jameson, and his thing was a book. He wrote a sort of autobiography, but ghostwritten by him. And his thing was, you write down your questions, you memorize them, and then when you sit down with someone, kind of like what you're doing now, like either you guys have a script, it's got to be conversational. And so just having that question in the back, and then when someone mentions something and it's like 4 questions down, being able to bring that up And then for me, I'm literally, I've got a computer and I'm crossing out the question from the bottom.
Gotcha.
And so it's as conversational as I can make it, given my current skill level.
Gotcha.
Will you try to make a little note if you can of something like that, or is it just purely a mental?
That's a great skill, by the way. I just want to tell you, so it's good. I'm taking notes of that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that.
I don't. So I heard that other hosts on Insight have written down questions, but you can hear the clippity clappity of the keys, and I don't want that. Like I just took a sip of water earlier, and I was like, "Oh shoot!" Like that interrupts the audio. So for that reason, I'm very hesitant to write something down, and also even writing something down with a pencil, I'm not good at multitasking. Some people like Terry Gross she doesn't interview people in the same room because she wants to be reading a passage of their book to find the question. She wants to be looking at her notes. I just learned this a couple days ago. And so she actually, for her style, is not being in the same room as the person, like having them over Zoom or in a different I want to be there because so I can cue in more closely to what they're saying. And the more you listen, the better the interview is going to be. And so for that reason, I am not writing in questions, and you just have to trust yourself that you're going to say the right thing.
Probably reading your body language is easier too. Also, to read your body language, you're closer to kind of little key notes, how they're moving, certain things like that. It's easier because when you're there on Zoom, you're not going to be able to see that.
I can't imagine just reading somebody's book while talking to them.
No, that'd be terrifying. But I think some people have an ability to
take both in.
To take both in. They've got multiple channels. I'm a one-channel dude.
Again,
yeah, right.
But like that's about it. I can't read somebody's book unless amazing skill.
No, and I sometimes notice that I will go on to my next scripted question, and I really can't stand listening to myself, but I force myself to when I'm able to for professional development.
Yeah.
And sometimes I hear someone give some little nugget that could have been interesting, but instead I went to my next scripted question, and that's like to me like I'm like, oh, like 'cause someone, even if they'll just might end on a word, like like ultimately we tried to make an album about inclusion, and then I just go to my next question, and then I listen to them like, oh, the question should have been, what does that mean to you? What is inclusion to you? How is this song or album related to the theme of inclusion? And so that's just nerves. That's like looking at your next question and thinking about saying that instead of being fully present.
But I mean, I'm sure that's the more you do.
Right, that's my arc.
So I want to know what's next. I know that's up in the air, but do you imagine sticking with some in some way after your?
So I have this limited term, and I've never been happier in my career. Amazing things happen, and I don't know where this is going, but because I've got a mortgage to pay and a family to support.
Absolutely.
But I found something that I love, and I think that wherever your career takes you, once you have that thing you love, you'll find a way to either do it or prepare for it. And sometimes preparing for it is just about it. But as long as you're always thinking about it and maybe taking little steps here and there to get back to it, you're still feeding that creative fire. And I felt for the last few years that I wasn't feeding that creative fire, and it was an issue. And so I hope to continue wherever my career takes me. Maybe I'll do more MoChill episodes, like whatever it is.
You want a segment on here, you get your own segment.
Hey, by all means. What I want to know is tell the people something. That's all the stuff you did. Tell people something about your hobbies, something personal they don't know, something like that you like to do.
humanizes.
Yeah,
you.
that's like what do you do in your spare time besides your family? What would you like to do?
Yeah, I mean, I love being outdoors. As Michael knows, I now have a pool.
Oh, it's
And
beautiful.
It is, by the way.
it's very fortunate. It's a privileged thing to have a pool. Living in Sacramento, it's the best asset I've ever had in my life.
Sure, and like
You know?
you want a good way to like make sure people are at your house, and like for your kids, daughters, like you want to make sure that their friends come over to your house and not the other way, and you get to see kids grow up. I think
It's been amazing, and I always say that I'm very social as long as someone's in front of me, and that's to say that like my wife, like she gets people to the house. I've never been good at
that part.
just honestly at just like making friends. Like I never know how to. I always joke that like I never know how to get a dude's phone number. You know, like when I was single, it was like well known. Like okay, like hey,
you're kicking it.
Yeah, like he walks up. We all got game. The gal, she's got her game. You got your game. But there's like a known dynamic.
Yeah.
With dudes, I've never known how to get a dude's
It's
phone
weird.
number. I never know how to do it.
It is weird. It is weird.
But
you want to be home? You like, it's like
what?
Brennan and from like Brennan and what's
bromance.
her name from Step to. Oh, did we just become best friends?
Yeah,
right.
bromance.
That's what me and Alan were like though. We were just like instantly he made a Lebowski reference and I'm like. Ooh.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So
you got to
cool,
hit
man.
it off, and sometimes work's good for that. But to me, being able to, I mean, there's nothing I love more than just having conversations.
That's cool. Awesome, man. I like that part. Good. Yeah.
You found something that you can do that.
And you're good at it too, so that's awesome because you wouldn't be in that position, obviously. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's very.
And that's a very.
How about
listen.
Comstocks? Let's talk a little bit about Comstocks.
Sure.
Because we both have a my stepbrother. But it sounded like that you kind of like cut your teeth there.
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of history. I last day of college, like I walked for my graduation, and I threw my whole life in the back of my truck, and my girlfriend was crying, my college girlfriend was crying, and I drove off to Sacramento the next day, and it was this internship that was a political journalism internship where the kids, the interns, would work at the news bureaus in the capital bureaus for the newspapers. But there was this project that was outside of that to help this legendary journalist write his memoir. And this guy was, his name's Frank McCullough. He was 89 years old at the time. He passed about a decade ago.
Legend. My dad knows it. He was a legend in Sacramento.
Okay.
So Frank McCullough was the bureau chief of Saigon during the Vietnam War for Time magazine, the biggest magazine in the world. You know, like Henry Luce was the biggest publisher. You know, Citizen Kane, I think, is based on Henry Luce, right? And this is when, you know, the news magazine just dominated. And newspapers, you know, were how it was the internet getting delivered to your home.
Yeah.
And so this guy rode the biggest wave of the golden age. He was the executive editor of Time after he was Saigon bureau chief. And then they wanted him actually to be the, quote, cover story writer for Time magazine, meaning writing like every cover he could.
Yeah.
He turned that job down because he was like, it wouldn't be fair. You need to let more journalists in. Can you imagine like being offered to write the cover story for the biggest magazine in the world? And so this guy covered the mob in Vegas. He was, you know, they threatened to kill him. He covered Humphrey Bogart, who I guess punched him in the face at one point for like you know, getting too close on the red carpet or something.
Wow.
He covered AIDS for, I think it was the Examiner. He was the managing editor. That was when the Examiner, not the Chronicle, was the flagship newspaper of San Francisco.
Wow.
And he did this story. He actually had a son contracted, and he might have died of AIDS. And so they did this series called AIDS in America, and it really like it started a big conversation, right? And so after Time magazine, he was the managing editor of the LA Times and then the SF Examiner, and then finally finished his career at Sacramento Bee. And one of his proteges wanted to write. He'd always said, "No, I'm a journalist. I'm not, biography." But people were hitting him up his whole life to do it. He finally agrees. 89 years old. His wife had just died, and he had lost his sight. He was blind. Okay, and my job as a 22-year-old was to drive to his house. He lived in a retirement center in Santa Rosa, and research his life. Like, I was reading books about Vietnam reporting. I was reading books about being on the presidential trail. He was on the campaign trail. He covered Richard Nixon and was at a campaign, went to his house to pick him up because they were going to the same campaign event together. He's sitting in the kitchen, and he hears Dick Nixon call his wife an effing B. I don't know if we say this on the radio, but an effing B on the... and he didn't report it because that's not what journalists did back in the day, right? And I said, why? Because now it would have been considered journalistic malpractice back then to report it. Right. Nowadays, it'd be journalistic malpractice not to tweet it out immediately.
Absolutely.
And so we had all these stories, and so my job was to research this guy's life and talk to his proteges, which one of them was like Phil Bronstein, who was the editor of the Chronicle at the time, a bunch of people that wrote for the Bee, and it was kind of like, okay, it's 2007, where's journalism going with the rise of the internet? So it was half memoir and half reflection on this industry in upheaval, right? And so my head was completely in the journalism stars after that. And I got a job as an education reporter in the Capitol for 3 years, and then when an opening at Comstocks magazine came, I jumped on that, and it was wonderful. It was the editor was Doug Curley, who just died in the past year. He was the editor in chief. He was he was a wonderful guy, and he used to say, "Alan, you're the weirdest young man I know." But he encouraged me to do the journalism I'd always wanted to do, which was go out there and, like my hero, Frank McCullough, write the cover story. So he encouraged me. He paid for me to go in the Central Valley to meet up with these farmers that were fighting high-speed rail, and
I remember that.
And embed with them.
Like,
yeah, right. Yeah. And so they had this, they were forming this this group. The word that comes to mind is posse, because these guys were it was like this old school, beautiful California story of these farmers coming together, and they put out their blueprints and we're gonna fight the train here and here. And then one of them mentioned to me, "Oh yeah, this runs in our blood because there's this book, The Octopus, that talks about this shootout where it was farmers versus the original railroad company that was building the railroad through California." Yeah. And so these guys, it was not only were they fighting for their livelihoods because they didn't want train tracks to be built through their orchards, but also in their minds, it was in their blood to do this. Yeah. And so I got out there and I stayed out there for a week with these guys, and Comstocks allowed me to write those kinds of stories.
That is really good.
Sounds kind of like a Yellowstone.
Yeah,
like the TV show.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I know. So what days do you come on so people can reach you and know where you are?
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
really important.
I appreciate
so let you know
that. I'll do the pitch for the show, and then I gotta break out of here.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time out with us too. By the way,
absolutely.
Come back anytime you want, man.
Yeah,
it's great to, and I feel funny being the one that talks so much on the interview, but I figured that was my job.
That's your job.
It's about you. It's not about us. We talk every week. They don't want to hear about me. I mean, trust me.
Next time I want to hear more about you.
Hey, you know what? You can interview anytime you want. Turn tables and ask me anything you want. I'll share my whole story. I have no problem with that.
So the show is Monday through Wednesday on Capital Public Radio, and there's a podcast. There's a Cap Radio podcast, and so the show's Insight, and it's at noon and 7 p.m. So it's live at noon, rebroadcast at 7, but you can catch it anytime on the Cap Radio podcast. On the Cap Radio app, Insight Podcast.
Okay, nice. And it's online too, right? Catch it online.
capradio.org/insight.
Okay, and we're going to put this on our website also. So we just a shout out. We'll have you on there also so people can reach you.
Great. Okay.
Great. We definitely appreciate you, man.
And for the website though, we given the temporary nature, we might want to put like your personal contact somewhere.
Sure.
Well, whatever.
We can do like I said, like maybe like if you don't have a Facebook page, something like that, or whatever you have, or whatever page you want to have like that, and we just put that on access that way. That way, because if you're not there, you want to like
that sounds great.
Something public facing.
Yeah, it's alanyoung.net, and I should say I do want to make sure that I say that it's Insight with Vicky Gonzalez. Yes. That's the name of the show.
I'm glad she's
Vicky
getting better.
is coming back full time. She's been very outspoken about her breast cancer treatment. She's in chemotherapy, and talk about a hero. She's going through chemo and coming back and doing the show
already, right?
She just started coming back, and she's
great.
doing. So I'm doing Mondays and Tuesdays, and she's doing Wednesdays and Thursdays, and then she'll be back full time. And the plan is for me to bow out in the new year. So anyway, she's
so glad that Vicky's doing better. So.
Yeah, she's a heroic woman, and I'm definitely learning a lot and kind of apprenticing under her where I can, by kind of hitting her with all these questions. I learn something from her every day.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you.
We definitely do.
Brother.
Absolutely. Cool.
Next time we get you to do a song, man. Do a song for us, something like that, man.
He's a writer, man. We got some ideas. We had some. At least we had a Regulators remix idea.
Let's do it.
Right.
State Regulators.
State Regulators.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. We appreciate you, man. Well, we appreciate you. And we're out here. Great show, man. Y'all here.
Yep.
Awesome.
Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to episode 24 of the MoChill Zone podcast. We strive to bring you inspiring, unique, and entertaining stories. We hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Follow MoChill Productions on Instagram and Facebook for announcements of all our episodes' online release dates.